Right now, somewhere in the Persian Gulf, a tanker captain is staring at a radio and deciding whether to move his ship. Not because of weather, not because of a mechanical fault, because of a number. This week, the United States announced a 20% toll on cargo passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Not a shipping fee, not a tax on oil itself. A toll on movement. On the simple act of getting from one side of a narrow strip of water to the other. Within hours, oil prices jumped nearly 10%. But here's the strange part. Almost none of that oil actually stopped moving yet. You paid more at the pump this week for oil that hadn't even left the ground. That should feel insane. It isn't. And the real reason is far stranger than supply and demand. Because what actually spiked wasn't oil. It was fear, priced in real time, and passed directly to you. Strip away the tankers and the headlines, and you're left with something older than oil itself. Someone controls a narrow passage. Everyone else has to get through it. And the person who controls the passage gets to set the terms for everyone who doesn't. That's not a 2026 invention. That's the oldest business model in human history. Let your brain sit with this for a second. Why does controlling a doorway matter more than controlling the room behind it? Because a doorway doesn't need to be big to be powerful. It just needs to be unavoidable. Go back 800 years to the Rhine River in medieval Germany. Local lords built castles on narrow bends in the river, stretched chains across the water, and demanded payment from every merchant boat that wanted to pass. Historians count over 30 of these toll points along a single stretch of river. None of these lords produced anything. They grew no wheat, mined no ore, built no ships. They simply owned a choke point, and merchants paid because the alternative was worse. Sound familiar? Move forward a few centuries to the Ottoman Empire, which controlled the Bosphorus Strait, the narrow gateway between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. For hundreds of years, any grain, timber, or goods moving from Russia toward Europe had to pass through that strait, and the Ottomans could open or restrict it almost at will. Entire European economies planned around the mood of a single government sitting on a strip of water barely a mile wide at its narrowest point. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The Ottomans didn't need to close the strait very often. The threat alone was usually enough to move prices in Europe. Grain traders in London and Amsterdam adjusted their expectations based on rumors out of Istanbul, long before a single ship was actually turned away. That's not ancient history. That's this week's oil market with better hats. Jump forward again to 1956. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, a passage that carries a huge share of the world's shipping between Europe and Asia. Britain and France, worried about losing control of that route, went to war over it within months. Not over the water itself. Over who got to decide who passes and at what price. Global shipping costs spiked immediately, long before a single cargo ship was actually rerouted around Africa. Notice the pattern repeating. A narrow passage, a single controlling party, and a price shock that arrives before the actual disruption does, because the market is never really pricing the present. It's pricing what everyone fears might come next. Every generation seems to relearn this lesson from scratch, as if it's brand new. It never is. It's just a different strait, a different flag, and a different percentage written on the toll. Economist Thomas Schelling spent much of his career studying exactly this kind of leverage, the strategy of controlling outcomes not through direct force, but through the credible threat of force. Schelling's work on coercion showed something counterintuitive. You don't actually have to follow through on a threat for it to reshape behavior. You just have to make people believe you might. That's what happened in the oil market this week. The toll didn't need to be collected from a single ship to change what you paid for gas. The announcement did the work by itself. Think about what that means. You are currently paying a price that reflects a decision that hasn't fully happened yet, based on a threat that may never be fully carried out, made by people you'll never meet, about a stretch of water you'll never see. And your brain accepts this without blinking, because it's wired to treat uncertainty as expensive, whether or not the underlying event ever actually occurs. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky spent decades documenting exactly this pattern. Their research on how people weigh risk found that humans respond far more strongly to the possibility of loss than to an equivalent possibility of gain. A 10% chance that oil supply gets disrupted doesn't just move prices by 10% worth of concern. It moves them by much more, because the fear of scarcity is processed by your brain as more urgent than the comfort of abundance. Here's a simple way to feel it yourself. Imagine someone offers you a guaranteed $100 or a coin flip that could win you $200 or nothing. Most people, when researchers actually run this experiment, take the guaranteed 100, even though the coin flip is worth exactly the same amount on average. Now, flip the framing. Imagine you're guaranteed to lose $100, or you can gamble on a coin flip that could cost you $200 or nothing. Suddenly, most people take the gamble. Same math, completely different decision. The only thing that changed was whether the frame was a gain or a loss. That's the switch flipping inside oil traders this week. A 20% toll isn't really a number. It's a frame. It tells every trader, every insurer, every shipping company, assume loss until proven otherwise. And once that frame is set, people don't wait for proof. They price in the worst case immediately, because waiting to confirm it feels riskier than assuming it's already true. Markets are made of people, so markets do this too, just with more zeros attached. Traders aren't pricing in the oil that's missing today. They're pricing in your fear and everyone else's fear of oil that might be missing next month. And because that fear is collective, it becomes self-fulfilling almost instantly. The price moves before the ships do. Here's where it gets even stranger. Economic historian Douglas North built much of his career around a simple idea. Economies don't just run on goods and money, they run on institutions, on the rules, trust, and enforcement mechanisms that let strangers do business across long distances. A toll on a strait isn't really about oil. It's about who gets to write the rules of a system everyone else depends on, and how much uncertainty they can inject into it before people stop trusting the passage at all. Once trust in a route breaks down, insurance costs rise. Shipping companies won't send a tanker through a contested strait without insurance, and insurers won't offer cheap coverage on a route where the rules keep changing. That insurance premium gets added to the cost of every barrel, whether or not that specific tanker ever gets stopped. Think about what an insurer actually does here. They're not measuring how much oil moved yesterday. They're estimating the odds that something goes wrong tomorrow, then charging today for that estimate. It's a bet on a headline, wrapped inside a shipping contract, wrapped inside a barrel of crude, wrapped inside the number on the sign at your local gas station. And every party in that chain adds their own small premium for their own small piece of the uncertainty. The tanker owner adds a margin. The insurer adds a margin. The trader who bought the futures contract adds a margin. By the time oil reaches a refinery, then a gas station, then your car, the price you're paying is stacked with layers that have almost nothing to do with drilling, refining, or trucking. A meaningful slice of it is the accumulated cost of uncertainty itself, priced in by traders, insurers, and shipping companies who are all reacting to the same threat you just read about in a headline. None of them have to be wrong about what actually happens in the strait. They just have to be uncertain about it. Uncertainty alone is enough to move the number you see at the pump. You're not paying for oil. You're paying for everyone's collective nervousness about oil. And this is where the modern mirror gets uncomfortable, because you do this too, just at a smaller scale, with your own money. Think about the last time you avoided spending, not because your income actually changed, but because you heard something worrying on the news. A layoff at a company you don't work for. A warning about a slowing economy. A headline about rising prices somewhere else. Nothing about your actual paycheck changed. But your behavior did instantly, the same way oil traders' behavior changed this week before a single ship was turned away. Maybe you put off a big purchase you had already saved for. Maybe you moved money into something that felt safer, even though nothing about your job or your bills had actually changed yet. Maybe you just felt a tightness. The same tightness a shipping insurer feels when a strait gets tense, and you let that tightness make the decision for you. You built your own toll booth. Uncertainty walked up to it, and you paid in caution and hesitation, in a purchase you didn't make. That's not weakness. That's the same ancient wiring that made medieval merchants pay lords on the Rhine, that made grain traders defer to rumors out of Istanbul, that's making gas cost more this week for oil that's still sitting underground. The choke point isn't always a strait. Sometimes it's a headline. Sometimes it's a single sentence from someone with power, landing in your feed, and your financial decisions rerouting around it before you've even had time to check if it's true. None of this means the danger in the Gulf isn't real, or that prices should never move. Threats can become reality. Straits do get closed. Wars do disrupt supply. But there's a difference between paying for what has actually happened and paying for what everyone is simply afraid might happen. And most of us, most of the time, never stop to ask which one we're actually funding. Here's the question worth sitting with. The next time a price moves or a headline spikes your worry, ask yourself what you're actually paying for. Is it the thing itself? Or is it the fear of what the thing might become? Because right now, somewhere in the Persian Gulf, a tanker captain is still staring at that radio, deciding whether to move his ship based on a toll that may never actually be collected from him. And somewhere in your own life, you're doing the exact same calculation on a much smaller strait with a much smaller ship, deciding whether to move your money based on a threat that hasn't happened yet either,